A waitress warned the millionaire about his friend. The next day, a luxury car showed up at his. Nathan Carter adjusted his cufflinks as he gazed around the opulent cafe. The golden glow of chandeliers reflecting off polished mahogany tables. It was a place reserved for the elite, a sanctuary for the city's wealthiest, where deals worth millions were casually discussed over steaming espressos. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. He and his business partner, his best friend of over a decade, were on the verge of finalizing the biggest deal of their careers. A deal that would elevate their company to unparalleled heights and secure their place among the most powerful men in the industry. Yet, beneath the surface of his outward confidence, something gnawed at Nathan, a strange sense of unease. Though he couldn't quite place its origin, he chalked it up to the weight of responsibility. After all, securing a deal of this magnitude came with its pressures. Across the table sat his partner, Ethan Reynolds, the man Nathan had built everything with. Ethan was scrolling through his phone, eyes skimming messages, seemingly detached from the gravity of what they were about to accomplish. The two had met in college, young and ambitious, working tirelessly from their shared dorm room to create a startup that defied all odds. Through years of struggle, sacrifices, and sleepless nights, they had transformed that fledgling business into a corporate empire. And now, after all they had endured, the fruits of their labor were finally within reach. "I'm going to hit the restroom," Nathan murmured, pushing back his chair. Ethan barely looked up, nodding absent-mindedly. "Yeah, sure." Nathan walked toward the back of the cafe, weaving through finely dressed patrons, his thoughts drifting to what lay ahead: expansion, new markets, greater influence. He was ready. This was it. But the moment Nathan stepped away, something shifted. Emily Lawson, a young waitress who had been silently working through her shift, cautiously approached the table to refill Ethan's water. She had been working here for months, always blending into the background, barely noticed by the powerful men and women who occupied the cafe's leather-bound chairs. She had learned to stay quiet, to avoid catching the attention of people who viewed her as nothing more than a service worker. Tonight, however, was different. As she reached the table, Emily's hands stilled. Ethan, assuming no one was within earshot, spoke quietly into his phone. His voice was calm, measured, but the words he uttered sent ice through Emily's veins. "Everything's set. Nathan has no clue," he said, his tone tinged with satisfaction. "By this time tomorrow, the deal will be signed, and I'll have full control. Once it's done, he'll have nothing left. I've been planning this for months." Emily nearly dropped the glass in her hand. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. Had she heard that correctly? Was Ethan really? No. It couldn't be. But the certainty in his voice, the absolute finality in his words, made her stomach twist in dread. She took a step back, retreating to the safety of the kitchen. Her mind raced. She had no stake in this. This wasn't her business. She was just a waitress, a nobody to men like them. But could she really stand by and do nothing while an innocent man was about to be blindsided by the one person he trusted most? Nathan returned to the table moments later, oblivious to the storm that had just begun to swirl around him. Ethan greeted him with a warm smile, the same easy charm he had always carried, masking the knife he held behind his back. Emily watched from a distance, her breath shallow. Her instincts screamed at her to walk away, to forget what she had just heard. But her conscience refused to let her. Taking a deep breath, she made a decision. As Ethan excused himself to take a call outside, Emily seized her chance. Heart pounding, she approached Nathan's table, her palms damp with nerves. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. Nathan looked up, his brows knitting together in mild surprise. It was rare for staff to address him directly. "Yes?" Emily hesitated. What if he didn't believe her? What if this backfired? But there was no turning back now. "I overheard something," she whispered, glancing toward the door to make sure Ethan was still outside. "Something you need to know." Nathan's frown deepened. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "Your friend, Ethan, he's planning to betray you." Nathan blinked. He let out a small, incredulous laugh. "I'm sorry, what?" Emily's pulse raced, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. "I heard him on the phone. He said once the deal is finalized, he'll take control of everything. That you'll have nothing." Nathan stared at her, his expression shifting from amusement to confusion. Then something darker. Disbelief. It was absurd. Ethan? His best friend? The man he had built an empire with? It didn't make sense. You must be mistaken," Nathan said, though the unease in his chest grew heavier. "Ethan would never." "I know how it sounds," Emily interrupted, desperation creeping into her voice. "But I swear, I'm telling the truth. I heard him myself. He's been planning this for months." Nathan's mind spun. The weight of her words settled over him like a stone pressing against his chest. He wanted to dismiss it outright. It was ridiculous. But something about the urgency in Emily's voice, the sincerity in her eyes, made it impossible to ignore. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more serious. Emily nodded. "I wouldn't be telling you this if I wasn't." For a moment, Nathan sat frozen, his world tilting on its axis. Ethan had been his brother in all but blood. They had built their dreams together, shared victories and failures. If what Emily said was true, it would mean that the one person he had trusted above all others had been quietly, methodically plotting to destroy him. Nathan felt sick. Emily stepped back, sensing his inner turmoil. I couldn't let you go into that deal without knowing." Nathan inhaled sharply. The celebration that had felt inevitable just moments ago now felt like a house of cards, teetering on the brink of collapse. He glanced at the papers on the table, the contract that would have signed away everything he had worked for. His hands clenched into fists beneath the table. Then Ethan re-entered the cafe. His smile easy, his demeanor unchanged. He sat down across from Nathan as if nothing had happened, as if he wasn't already sharpening the blade to stab him in the back. Nathan forced a smile, though his insides churned with doubt. He had always believed trust was the foundation of everything: friendship, business, success. But as he looked at Ethan, he realized something chilling. Trust could be the greatest illusion of all. And if he wasn't careful, it would cost him everything. Nathan Carter had always believed that trust was the foundation of success. He built his company with it, cultivated his friendships around it, and made every decision with the confidence that the people closest to him had his back. But that night, as he sat alone in his office, Emily's warning played over and over in his mind, unraveling the very core of what he had always held sacred. Ethan Reynolds, his best friend, his partner in everything, was planning to take everything from him. Nathan wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Maybe Emily had misheard. Maybe she had only caught part of the conversation. But the doubt had already taken root, poisoning every memory he had with Ethan. The celebrations, the hard-fought victories, the nights they spent drafting business plans over takeout, it all felt tainted now. What if it had all been a lie? He clenched his jaw, gripping the arms of his chair as he tried to suppress the rising tide of emotions. He needed proof. He couldn't confront Ethan on the words of a stranger alone. No, if he was going to expose the truth, he had to be smart about it. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for his phone and scrolled through his contacts. There was only one person he could trust with something like this: Julian Maddox, a private investigator with a reputation for uncovering the dirtiest of corporate secrets. Nathan had only worked with him a handful of times in the past, mostly for minor security concerns within the company. But this was personal. He pressed the call button. "Nathan." Julian's voice was crisp and alert despite the late hour. "What's going on?" Nathan hesitated, as if saying the words out loud would make them real. "I need you to look into someone for me. Ethan Reynolds." A pause. Then, "You think he's up to something?" Nathan exhaled sharply. "I don't want to think it. But I need to know the truth." There was a brief rustling on the other end of the line. The sound of Julian reaching for a notepad. "What am I looking for?" "Bank statements, unusual transfers, offshore accounts, anything that doesn't add up." Nathan hesitated before adding, "And any conversations or meetings he's had outside of our usual business dealings." Julian's tone darkened. "That's a hell of an accusation." "Nathan, I know," he admitted, his voice tight, "but if I'm wrong, I'll live with it. If I'm right." His stomach twisted. "Then I've been working with a man who's been planning my downfall for months." "I'll start digging," Julian promised. "Give me a couple of days." Nathan ended the call and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. The weight of betrayal pressed against his ribs, suffocating. He wanted to believe that Ethan was still the man he had called his brother. But deep down, a terrible truth was beginning to take shape. The next 2 days were the longest of Nathan's life. He kept up appearances, sitting through meetings with Ethan as though nothing had changed. But everything had. Every smile, every handshake, every inside joke between them now felt like a lie. Ethan continued to act as he always had, charming, confident, completely at ease. If he was hiding anything, he was doing a damn good job of it. But Nathan saw the cracks. A flicker of impatience in Ethan's gaze when Nathan suggested delaying the deal for a few more days. A twitch in his jaw when Nathan brought up future projects. As though he knew there would be no future together. And most telling of all, Ethan never once mentioned their friendship. Before, there had always been a sense of camaraderie between them, an unspoken understanding that no matter what, they had each other's backs. But now, Nathan saw it for what it was. A carefully maintained illusion. And then, on the third day, Julian called. "I've got something." Nathan gripped his phone, his heart pounding. "Tell me." "There are irregularities in Ethan's accounts," Julian said grimly. "Small transfers at first, but they've been increasing over the past several months. He's been funneling money into an offshore account, nothing illegal on its own." "But given the timing? Right around when you started negotiating this deal?" Nathan's hands curled into fists. "How much money?" "5 million so far," Julian replied. "And that's just what I've found on the surface. He's covering his tracks well. But it's clear he's been preparing for a major move." Nathan's chest tightened. "And the meetings?" "He's been talking to your competitors," Julian revealed, quietly, behind closed doors. "There are emails, subtle. Nothing outright incriminating, but the implications are there. He's been positioning himself as the key player in your company. If you had signed that contract, he would have had full control." Nathan's vision blurred with rage. "So it's true?" Julian sighed. "I'm afraid so." For a long moment, Nathan didn't say anything. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, disbelief, hurt. Ethan had been planning this for months, smiling to his face while stabbing him in the back. Nathan took a slow breath, his voice ice cold when he finally spoke. "We stop him now." Julian's voice carried a note of approval. "What's the plan?" Nathan's jaw clenched. "First, we freeze his accounts. He's not getting another cent of company money. Then, I want to confront him. But not until I'm ready to bury him." Julian chuckled darkly. "That's what I like to hear." After the call ended, Nathan sat in silence, staring out over the city skyline. Everything had changed. The man he had trusted above all others had been planning his downfall. He had almost signed everything away, blind to the betrayal unfolding right in front of him. But not anymore. Ethan Reynolds had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated Nathan Carter. Now, Nathan wasn't just going to stop him. He was going to destroy him. The next evening, Nathan arranged for a private meeting with Ethan in one of their company's executive suites. The setting was perfect, neutral, professional, and far from prying eyes. Ethan arrived exactly on time, as confident as ever, greeting Nathan with his usual easy charm. "Nate, my man," he said with a grin, clapping him on the back. "Hope you're finally ready to seal this deal." Nathan forced a smile, though every muscle in his body burned with the effort of keeping his rage contained. "Have a seat," he said smoothly. Ethan did, crossing his legs, completely unaware that his empire was seconds away from collapsing. Nathan let the silence stretch between them before he finally spoke. "I know everything, Ethan." Ethan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Nathan leaned forward, his voice deadly calm. "The offshore accounts, the stolen money, the meetings with my competitors." He paused, watching as Ethan's confident mask began to crack. "I know you've been planning to take over the company." A flicker of something dark crossed Ethan's face. Fear? Panic? Then, just as quickly, it was gone. He chuckled, shaking his head. "Come on, Nathan, where are you getting this nonsense?" Nathan's lips curled into a cold smile. "From my private investigator." Silence. Ethan's grip on the chair tightened. Nathan's voice dropped to a near whisper, laced with ice. "Your accounts are frozen. Your connections? Cut off. You tried to ruin me, Ethan. But the only person who's losing everything is you." Ethan's face twisted in fury. "You think you've won?" he spat. Nathan leaned back, his eyes filled with calm fury. "No, Ethan." He exhaled slowly. "I've only just begun." Ethan Reynolds sat frozen in his chair, his face pale as Nathan Carter stared him down from across the sleek mahogany table. The air in the executive suite was thick with tension, suffocating and inescapable. For years, they had built an empire together. There had been late nights, high-stakes deals, and moments where Nathan had trusted Ethan with everything. And now, that trust was shattered beyond repair. Nathan could still hear Emily's voice in his mind, the quiet urgency of her warning. Ethan was going to betray him, had already been planning it for months. And now, with the evidence laid bare before him, Nathan had no doubts left. Ethan, sensing the shift in power, inhaled deeply and tried to regain his usual confidence. "Nathan, you're making a mistake," he said, his voice calm, but the beads of sweat forming on his forehead betrayed his fear. Nathan folded his arms, leaning back in his chair, his gaze ice cold. "A mistake?" he echoed. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "My only mistake was trusting you." Ethan forced a chuckle. "I have no idea what you think you found." Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, placing it face up on the table. With a tap, a recorded audio file played. "Nathan has no idea. Once the deal is signed, the company is mine. I've been planning this for months." Ethan's blood drained from his face. "That's a conversation you had at the cafe." Nathan cut him off. "A waitress overheard you and warned me. I didn't believe her at first. I defended you." "Ethan," his voice hardened, "but now, I see I was wrong." Ethan's fingers dug into the armrests of his chair, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But there was none. Nathan stood, stepping toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city they had once conquered together. "I've frozen your accounts," he continued, his voice devoid of emotion. "Your connections are gone. Your allies? They won't risk their reputations for you. And now, I'm making sure you never have the chance to betray anyone else." Ethan shot up from his seat, panic finally overtaking his composure. "Nathan, please, you can't do this to me." Nathan turned, his expression unreadable. "I already have." Before Ethan could protest further, the door burst open. Julian Maddox, Nathan's private investigator, stepped inside, followed by 2 uniformed police officers. "Ethan Reynolds," one of them announced in a firm, unwavering tone, "you're under arrest for financial fraud, embezzlement, and attempted unlawful takeover of corporate assets." Ethan's body went rigid. "No, no, you can't." He twisted to Nathan, his eyes wide with desperation. "Nathan, please, we're friends." Nathan didn't flinch. He didn't say a word as Ethan was pulled from the room. Struggling, screaming, pleading, the door slammed shut behind him, leaving behind an eerie silence. Nathan closed his eyes and exhaled. It was over, but the hollow feeling in his chest told him the real battle had only just begun. 2 days later, the news exploded. Corporate betrayal. Ethan Reynolds arrested for fraud and attempted takeover. Every newspaper, every financial outlet, every online blog covered the scandal. Ethan Reynolds, the man once praised as one of the brightest minds in the business world, was now nothing more than a disgraced criminal. But despite the headlines, Nathan didn't feel victorious. The damage Ethan had done ran deep. Investors were pulling out, stocks were fluctuating, and, worst of all, it wasn't just Nathan who had suffered from Ethan's betrayal. During the investigation, Julian uncovered something even worse. Ethan had embezzled funds not just from corporate accounts but from the employee retirement fund. Hundreds of workers, loyal employees who had dedicated decades of their lives to the company, had suddenly lost everything they had been saving for. Nathan felt the weight of that revelation like a physical blow. He had spent years believing he was building something good, something that benefited everyone in the company. But now, because of Ethan, the people who had put their trust in him were suffering. That evening, he drove to a quiet neighborhood outside the city, the home of Marcus Bennett, one of the company's longest-serving employees. Nathan knocked on the door, and after a moment, an elderly man with tired eyes and slumped shoulders opened it. When he saw Nathan, his face hardened. "Nathan Carter," Marcus said, his voice heavy with disappointment. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight. Marcus let out a bitter chuckle. "You know, I gave 30 years to your company," he muttered. "I never thought I'd live to see the day my retirement fund would disappear overnight." Nathan's stomach twisted. "I swear, I didn't know what Ethan was doing," he said, But that doesn't change the fact that you and so many others were hurt because of it. Marcus studied him for a long moment. So what are you going to do about it? Nathan didn't answer right away. He had already decided. The next morning, he stood before a room full of employees, facing the people who had lost so much because of Ethan's greed. I failed you, Nathan admitted. I didn't see what was happening under my own roof. And because of that, many of you lost what you worked your entire lives for. A murmur spread through the crowd, filled with anger, pain, and uncertainty. But I am not going to let this be the end of the story. Nathan continued, his voice firm. As of today, I am personally restoring every single dollar that was stolen from you. Your pensions, your savings, they will be reinstated in full. The room went silent. Then, one by one, hands began to clap. A slow ripple of applause turned into a thunderous roar. Some people had tears in their eyes. Others simply nodded in appreciation. Nathan didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. This was the bare minimum of what he owed them. But as he scanned the crowd, his eyes landed on Emily. She stood near the back, arms crossed, but her expression was soft, proud. Nathan held her gaze for a long moment. He knew now that if it weren't for her, none of this would have been possible. And for the first time in weeks, he felt something other than anger, or exhaustion, or regret. He felt hope. Later that evening, Nathan sat in his office, staring at the skyline. The company would survive. The people who had been wronged would be taken care of. And Ethan was out of his life for good. The weight on his chest felt lighter than it had in a long time. A soft knock on the door broke his thoughts. Emily stepped in. You okay? Nathan let out a quiet chuckle. Honestly, I don't know, but I think things are going to be okay. Emily tilted her head, studying him for a moment. You did the right thing. You know, she said, not just getting rid of Ethan, but making sure the people he hurt didn't suffer because of his mistakes. Nathan nodded slowly. It was never about revenge. He admitted, I just wanted to make things right. Emily smiled. And you did. For the first time in a long time. Nathan believed it. Tomorrow, there would still be work to do. There would still be challenges, obstacles, and new battles to fight. But tonight, as he sat in the quiet, he allowed himself one simple thought. The worst was behind him, and the future was his to rebuild. Nathan Carter had faced betrayals, financial devastation, and the loss of his closest friendship. He had stood at the edge of ruin, staring down at the wreckage of everything he had worked for. But as he sat in his office that evening, gazing at the city skyline, he knew one undeniable truth. He would have lost everything if it weren't for Emily Lawson. She was just a waitress, at least. That's what the world had seen her as. A nameless figure moving through the background of high-stakes deals and million-dollar conversations. But in reality, Emily had been his savior, his guardian angel, the only one brave enough to step forward and tell him the truth. And tonight, Nathan had decided that he wouldn't let her sacrifice go unrecognized. Nathan drove through the quieter, humbler streets of the city, a stark contrast to the towering skyscrapers and luxury that had defined his world. The farther he drove, the more he realized just how little he knew about Emily. She had risked her job, her security, and maybe even her safety to warn him, yet he had never once stopped to ask who she really was. Pulling up in front of a small, modest house, Nathan sat for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. He had faced corporate sharks and ruthless businessmen, but for some reason, knocking on Emily's door felt more nerve-wracking than any boardroom showdown. Finally, he stepped out of the car and made his way to the front door. He knocked lightly, and after a few seconds, the door creaked open. Emily stood there, blinking up at him in shock. Her brown hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and she was dressed casually, so different from the composed and quiet waitress he had first met at the cafe. Mr. Carter? She asked, her voice uncertain. Nathan gave a small, lopsided smile. I think after everything, you can just call me Nathan. Emily hesitated before stepping aside, motioning for him to come in. The house was small but well kept, the scent of herbal tea lingering in the air. There was an old couch, a few well-worn books stacked on a coffee table, and in the corner, a framed photo of a younger Emily with an older woman, her mother. Nathan assumed. He turned back to her. I wanted to come by and thank you. Properly. Emily's cheeks flushed slightly, and she shrugged. You don't have to. I was just doing the right thing. Nathan shook his head. No, Emily, you weren't just doing the right thing. You were doing something incredibly brave. You had no reason to get involved. But you did. You put yourself at risk to help me. That's not something I take lightly. Emily bit her lip, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. I know what it's like to feel powerless. To be in a situation where someone is about to take everything from you. And no one is willing to help. Nathan frowned, sensing the weight in her words. Is that what happened to you? She exhaled slowly, glancing toward the picture on the table. My mom worked in finance. She was one of the smartest women I knew. But she trusted the wrong people. A corrupt executive manipulated her into taking the fall for something she didn't do. She lost everything. Our home, our savings. I had to drop out of college to take care of her. Nathan's stomach twisted. He had spent so much time focused on his own betrayal that he had never considered what Emily's world looked like. You gave up your future for her, he murmured. Emily nodded, forcing a smile. She was my mom. I would have done anything for her. Nathan felt a lump form in his throat. Here was someone who had lost so much already, yet still had the strength to stand up for a stranger, for him. And that's when he knew. He couldn't just walk away without doing something for her. Nathan leaned forward, his tone firm. Emily, I want to help you. Emily frowned, shaking her head quickly. You don't have to do anything for me. Nathan, really? He chuckled softly. That's the thing. I don't have to. I want to. She hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face. What do you mean? Nathan met her gaze, determination settling in his chest. I know you had to drop out of school. I know you put your dreams on hold. And that's not fair. You deserve a future. Emily, you deserve a chance to go back to school and finish what you started. Emily's lips parted slightly in shock. You're saying? I want to pay for you to go back. Nathan said simply. Full tuition. No strings attached. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. I can't accept that. That's too much. It's not. Nathan interrupted. You saved me. Emily, you saved my company, my career. If you hadn't spoken up, I would have been ruined. The least I can do is make sure you get to follow your own dreams. Emily swallowed hard, her hands trembling at her sides. I don't even know what to say. Say yes, Nathan urged. Say you'll take this chance. Not just for me, but for yourself. Tears welled in her eyes. And for a moment, she looked away, breathing deeply. Then, finally, she nodded. Okay. Nathan let out a relieved breath. Good, but that's not all. Emily blinked. There's more? He smirked. I also want to offer you a job. Her eyebrows shot up. A job? Nathan nodded. You have instincts. Emily, you see things other people miss. And after what you did for me, I know you have the integrity and intelligence that any business needs. I want you on my team. Emily let out a breathless laugh. Nathan, I was a waitress. I don't know the first thing about working in a company like yours. That's what training is for. He countered. And besides, I have a feeling you'll pick it up faster than most. She stared at him, still in disbelief. You're serious about this? As serious as I've ever been. Tears finally slipped down Emily's cheeks, and she quickly wiped them away, laughing through the emotion. I don't know how to thank you. Nathan smiled warmly. Just take the opportunity and make the most of it. That's all the thanks I need. As Nathan drove back home that night, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Peace. Ethan had taken so much from him, but Emily had given him something back. Hope. She had reminded him that not everyone was out for themselves, that there were still good people in the world. And now, he had done something for her in return. But this isn't just Nathan's story, it's Emily's story, too. She had risked everything to help someone she didn't even know personally. And people like her deserve to be recognized, appreciated, and supported. So if you're reading this, if you believe that courage and kindness deserve to be rewarded, leave a like. Drop a comment, and let Emily know how much she inspires you. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person speaking up to change a life. And today, that person was Emily Lawson. Emily Lawson had always been someone who lived in the background. For years, she moved through life unseen, unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. Just another waitress refilling water glasses at a cafe where the rich and powerful discussed deals worth millions. But everything changed the night she overheard Ethan Reynolds plotting to betray Nathan Carter. That single moment of courage. That split-second decision to speak up. had altered not just Nathan's fate, but her own. Now, as she stood outside the towering glass building of Carter Enterprises, the weight of what lay ahead pressed down on her chest. This was no longer a world she observed from a distance. This was a world she was about to step into. And she was terrified. The receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. "Ms. Lawson, Mr. Carter is expecting you. His office is on the top floor." Emily nodded, tightening her grip on the strap of her bag. Every step she took toward the elevator felt surreal. Just a few weeks ago, she had been worrying about rent, about scraping together enough tips to make ends meet. She had never imagined herself walking into a corporate headquarters, let alone as someone Nathan Carter personally invited. The elevator doors slid open, revealing the executive floor. Sleek, modern, intimidating. Emily swallowed hard and stepped inside. Nathan's office door was slightly ajar. She could hear his voice inside, speaking to someone. As she hesitated at the threshold, she caught a glimpse of him, standing behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, his usual air of calm authority surrounding him. Only a few weeks ago, he had been a stranger to her. Now, he was the reason her life was about to change. She knocked lightly. Nathan turned, his face breaking into a smile. "Emily, come in." She took a deep breath and stepped inside, the city skyline stretching behind him like a backdrop to something out of a dream. "How are you feeling?" he asked, motioning for her to sit. Emily let out a small, nervous laugh. "Like I just walked into a place where I don't belong." Nathan tilted his head. "And why would you think that?" She hesitated. "Because I don't have a degree. Because I don't come from this world. Because until a few weeks ago, I was waiting tables." Nathan leaned forward, resting his arms on the desk. "And yet, despite all of that, you saw something no one else did. You spoke up when no one else would. You saved me." Emily's breath caught in her throat. "I'm not hiring you out of charity, Emily," Nathan continued. "I'm hiring you because I see something in you." Her fingers curled into her lap. "But what if I fail?" Nathan smiled. "Then you get back up and try again." The simplicity of his words settled something inside her. She had spent so much of her life doubting herself, afraid of failing, afraid of taking risks. But here was a man who had everything to lose, and yet he was willing to take a chance on her. How could she not do the same? She lifted her chin, finally meeting his gaze with steady determination. "All right," she said, "let's do this." Nathan grinned. "That's what I like to hear." The first few weeks at Carter Enterprises were nothing short of overwhelming. Emily was thrown into a world of business meetings, financial reports, and corporate strategies, things she had only ever read about in passing. She struggled hard. There were nights she went home exhausted, fighting the voice in her head that told her she wasn't good enough, that she was just a waitress, trying to play a role she didn't belong in. But then, there were moments, small victories, that kept her going. Like the first time she caught an error in a financial report before anyone else did. Or when one of the senior analysts turned to her in a meeting and asked, "Emily, what do you think?" Or when Nathan himself pulled her aside and said, "I knew you'd be good at this. But you're proving me right faster than I expected." Little by little, day by day, she found her place. She wasn't just someone who had stumbled into this world by accident. She belonged here. And soon, everyone else saw it too. One evening, Nathan called her into his office again. She assumed it was another strategy meeting, another discussion about company growth, until she saw the look in his eyes. It was different. "You've done incredible work, Emily," he said. She smiled. "Well, I had a good mentor." Nathan chuckled. "Flattery will get you far. But I'm not saying this as your mentor. I'm saying this as someone who recognizes talent when he sees it." Emily's heart pounded. "What are you saying?" Nathan stood, walking around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her. "I want to offer you a leadership position," he said, "overseeing our new expansion project." Emily felt the air leave her lungs. "A leadership position?" she repeated, as if saying the words aloud would make them less impossible. Nathan nodded. "You've proven yourself, Emily. You've shown intelligence, determination, and instinct, and I trust you to take this company into its next phase." For a long moment, Emily just stared at him. She thought about the girl she had been just a few months ago. The girl who had never spoken up. The girl who had been afraid of change. And then she thought about the woman she was now. Someone who had taken risks. Someone who had stepped up. Someone who deserved this. She let out a shaky breath. Yes, she whispered. I'll do it. Nathan smiled, extending his hand. Then welcome to leadership, Emily. As she shook his hand, something inside her shifted. She was no longer in the background. She was part of something bigger now. She was becoming the person she was always meant to be. Nathan Carter thought it was over. He had survived the betrayal. He had outmaneuvered Ethan Reynolds, protected his company, and ensured that justice was served. The empire he had built had taken a hit, but it stood tall, stronger than ever. And Emily Lawson, the woman who had saved him from disaster, was thriving. She had stepped into her role at Carter Enterprises with determination, intelligence, and an instinct that couldn't be taught. Nathan had made the right choice in bringing her in, and every day, she proved that she wasn't just a survivor, she was a force to be reckoned with. Everything was supposed to be moving forward. But ghosts don't fade so easily. And Ethan Reynolds wasn't done. The first sign came in the form of a sealed envelope on Nathan's desk. No return address, no name, just his own, printed in bold, black ink. Nathan hesitated before opening it, a familiar unease curling in his stomach. Since Ethan's arrest, he had spent months cleaning up the wreckage his former best friend had left behind. Legal battles, PR nightmares, financial recovery, but this was different. Inside the envelope was a single USB drive. Nathan stared at it for a long moment before plugging it into his laptop. A single video file appeared on the screen. His chest tightened. With a deep breath, he clicked play. The screen flickered to life, revealing a dimly lit hotel room. And sitting there, in a chair, was Ethan. Nathan's grip on the desk tightened. He should be in prison. But there Ethan was, smirking. And then, he spoke. Nathan, my old friend, you didn't really think I'd go down that easily, did you? Nathan's jaw clenched. He had seen this expression before, the cocky, unshakable confidence that Ethan always carried, even when he was standing on the edge of destruction. You may have frozen my accounts. You may have had me arrested. But I still have cards to play. Nathan's stomach twisted. See, I've been busy since we last spoke. You were always the golden boy. Nathan, the one people trusted. But trust is a fragile thing, isn't it? Ethan leaned forward, his smirk widening. I've been gathering information, digging through the past, and let's just say, when the media gets their hands on what I have, your precious reputation will be in shambles. Nathan's breath came slow and steady. But inside, his blood burned. What the hell was Ethan talking about? You think you've won? Ethan whispered. You haven't even begun to fight. The video ended. And just like that, the nightmare wasn't over. Nathan leaned back in his chair, staring at the black screen. He had spent his entire career building his name, his empire, his legacy. Everything he had worked for was built on trust. His investors trusted him. His employees trusted him. The world trusted him. But Ethan had always known how to manipulate that trust. Nathan knew better than to panic. The truth was on his side. But the truth didn't always matter when it came to public perception. And that was Ethan's game. Nathan picked up his phone and dialed Julian Maddox. The investigator answered on the first ring. Talk to me. Nathan exhaled sharply. Ethan's back. A beat of silence. I'll be there in an hour. Nathan hung up and ran a hand through his hair. He had to get ahead of this. Julian arrived just as the first news headlines hit the internet. Scandal at Carter Enterprises? Insider claims CEO Nathan Carter engaged in fraudulent business dealings. Exclusive. Sources reveal secret transactions that could ruin Nathan Carter. Nathan slammed his laptop shut, his pulse pounding. It's happening, he muttered. Julian sat across from him, arms crossed. What do we know? Nathan filled him in on the video. Ethan's threats. And now, the headlines spreading like wildfire. Julian's expression hardened. Ethan's bluffing. Nathan nodded. I know. But bluffs didn't matter when the world wanted a scandal. Julian leaned forward. All right, here's what we do. First, we dig, find out where he's been, who he's been talking to, and most importantly, what dirt he thinks he has on you. Nathan exhaled. And when we find it? Julian smirked. We make sure no one ever believes a word he says again. For the next 48 hours, Nathan and Julian worked tirelessly. They tracked Ethan's movements, intercepted leaked emails, traced bank transactions, and finally, they found it. Ethan had fabricated evidence. He had taken old financial reports, altered numbers, edited emails to make it look like Nathan had engaged in fraudulent deals. It was a lie, but the public didn't know that. And if Nathan didn't act fast, they never would. Nathan called a press conference. The room was packed, journalists, analysts, cameras flashing. The entire business world was watching. Nathan stepped onto the stage, his face unreadable. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of a scandal. He took a breath and began. There have been recent allegations made against me and Carter Enterprises. I am here today to set the record straight. The crowd hushed. Nathan laid out the truth. He showed the real financial reports, the real emails, the unaltered evidence. He exposed Ethan's manipulation, his history of deception, and the lengths he had gone to in order to destroy everything. And then, he delivered the final blow. My team has worked around the clock to trace the origins of these falsified claims. And today, I am filing a lawsuit against Ethan Reynolds for defamation, fraud, and corporate sabotage. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes of cameras lighting up the stage. Nathan walked off without another word. The world knew the truth now. Ethan Reynolds had played his final hand. And he had lost. Ethan thought he could manipulate the truth. He thought he could destroy everything Nathan had built. But what he didn't realize was, Nathan Carter wasn't the same man he had once betrayed. Nathan fought back. And he won. Now, it's your turn to make a stand. If you believe that truth should always win, if you believe that justice should always be served, leave a comment below. Let the world know that no matter how hard people try to tear you down, you can always rise again. Because in the end, the truth always prevails. Nathan Carter had fought the battle of his life. He had faced betrayal, the collapse of trust, and the attempted destruction of everything he had built. Ethan Reynolds had tried to tear him down, to ruin his legacy, to erase all that he had accomplished. But Ethan had failed. The truth had prevailed. Nathan had exposed every lie, crushed every accusation, and reclaimed the power Ethan had tried to steal. Now, as he stood at the window of his office, overlooking the city skyline, he felt something he hadn't in a long time. Relief. But there was still one last thing left to do. Because through all of it, the scandals, the lawsuits, the media firestorm, there had been one person who had never wavered. Emily Lawson. And tonight, Nathan was going to make sure she knew just how much that meant to him. Emily had stepped into Carter Enterprises as an outsider. She had entered a world of power and wealth that she had never belonged to, or at least, that's what she had told herself. But now, she was a leader. She was the person people turned to. The woman who had gone from serving customers in a cafe to sitting in high-level board meetings, making decisions that shaped the future of the company. And she had earned every second of it. She had stayed when others doubted her. She had fought alongside Nathan when the world tried to destroy him. And more than anything, she had proven to herself that she was meant for more than just a life in the background. But as she sat at her desk that evening, staring down at the reports she had been working on, a small voice in her head whispered, "Do you really deserve this?" Because no matter how much she had achieved, the fear of not being enough never truly went away. She had worked harder than anyone, but there was still a part of her that wondered, did she belong here? She was so lost in thought that she almost didn't hear the knock at her office door. She looked up, and there stood Nathan. Emily straightened. "Nathan," she greeted, setting her pen down. "I thought you'd gone home for the night." Nathan stepped inside, his expression unreadable. "Not yet. I needed to talk to you." Something in his tone made her heart beat a little faster. "Is everything okay?" Nathan let out a small chuckle. For the first time in a long time. "Yeah, everything is okay." He sat in the chair across from her. And for a moment, he didn't speak. Emily waited, watching as he ran a hand through his hair. His thoughts clearly heavier than he was letting on. And then, finally, he met her gaze. "You saved me, Emily." Her breath caught. "Nathan." "No," he cut her off gently. "Let me say this." She swallowed, nodding. Nathan leaned forward, his voice quieter now, but filled with something raw and real. "If you hadn't spoken up that day in the cafe, I wouldn't be here right now." He admitted, "I wouldn't have my company. I wouldn't have my reputation. I would have lost everything." Emily's chest tightened. "I just did what anyone would have done." Nathan shook his head. "No, you didn't." His eyes softened. "Most people wouldn't have said anything. They would have looked the other way. told themselves it wasn't their problem. Emily looked down, but Nathan reached forward, gently tilting her chin up so she had to meet his gaze. But you did say something. You stood up when no one else would. You didn't just save my company. Emily, you saved me. A lump formed in her throat. For so long, she had told herself that she was just a waitress, that she had no place in this world. But here he was, one of the most powerful men in the city, telling her that she had changed everything. That she had mattered. Emily blinked quickly, trying to hold back the rush of emotions threatening to spill over. Nathan exhaled and leaned back slightly, giving her space. I don't think I ever truly said thank you. You don't have to, she whispered. I do, he insisted, and I want to do more than just say it. Emily frowned slightly. What do you mean? Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek, navy blue folder. He set it on the desk in front of her. Emily hesitated before picking it up. As she opened it, her heart stopped. It was an official letter. From Carter Enterprises. And it had her name on it. Her hands shook as she read the first line. We are pleased to offer you the position of Chief Operations Officer. Emily's breath hitched. Her mind couldn't process what she was seeing. COO. Not assistant. Not analyst. COO. She looked up, completely stunned. Nathan? I don't understand. Nathan smiled. You've earned this, Emily. Her lips parted, but no words came out. You've worked harder than anyone. You've proven that you don't just belong here, you thrive here. He continued, and I trust you more than anyone. You're already shaping the future of this company. It's time to make it official. Emily pressed a hand to her chest. Overwhelmed. This is too much, she whispered. Nathan shook his head. It's exactly what you deserve. Tears burned the back of her eyes. For so long, she had believed she was invisible. For so long, she had believed she would never be more than what life had made her. And now she was being given the chance to stand at the top. She covered her mouth with her hand, emotion shaking through her entire body. Nathan gave her a small, knowing smile. Just say yes. She laughed, a choked, tear-filled laugh, and nodded. Yes. Nathan reached across the desk, offering his hand. She took it, and in that moment, she was no longer the girl in the shadows. She was standing in the light. The city skyline stretched before Emily Lawson as she stood by the glass window of her new office, the COO office. The letters still felt unreal. Chief Operations Officer of Carter Enterprises. Only months ago, she had been a waitress, unnoticed and overlooked, moving through the world as though she barely existed. She had spent years believing she would never be more than that, just another nameless worker in the background of other people's success stories. But that wasn't her story anymore. She had taken a chance, stepped forward when it mattered most, and changed the course of not only Nathan Carter's life but her own. And now, as she stared out at the bustling world below, she knew this was just the beginning. The company had planned an event, a grand celebration of their successful expansion and the new leadership changes. It wasn't just about business. It was about survival. It was about rising after being knocked down, about rebuilding stronger than before. Nathan had insisted on hosting the event in one of the company's most prestigious venues, a place of elegance, prestige, and power. And tonight, that place belonged to Emily Lawson. She stood near the entrance, watching as people filled the room, dressed in their finest. Executives, employees, investors, all gathered to acknowledge a new era for Carter Enterprises. Nathan appeared at her side, holding 2 champagne glasses. You're nervous, he observed, offering her one. Emily exhaled, taking the glass. I think that's an understatement. He smirked. You'll get used to it. Emily turned to face him fully, her eyes filled with sincerity. Nathan, I still don't know how to thank you for this. Nathan shook his head. You don't have to thank me. Emily, you earned this. She held his gaze for a moment before nodding. A chime rang, signaling that the speeches were about to begin. Nathan stepped onto the stage, taking the microphone as the room fell silent. His eyes swept over the crowd before he spoke. There was a time, not long ago, when I thought I had lost everything. He began. His voice was steady, but filled with emotion. I trusted the wrong person. I made mistakes, and for a moment, I believed it was over. The audience listened intently. But then, something incredible happened. He continued. A stranger stepped in, someone who had nothing to gain, but everything to lose. Someone who didn't turn away when she saw something wrong. Someone who changed the course of my life when I least expected it." Emily felt her throat tighten. Nathan turned toward her, his smile genuine. That person was Emily Lawson. A wave of applause rippled through the room. Emily swallowed hard as Nathan extended his hand toward her. "Emily, come up here." Every eye in the room was on her as she made her way to the stage. Nathan turned back to the crowd. Emily isn't just an employee. She's a leader. She's someone with integrity, vision, and a strength that few people possess. And tonight, I want to officially welcome her as Carter Enterprises' new Chief Operations Officer. The room erupted into cheers. Emily stood there, overwhelmed by the moment. The girl who had once stood in the shadows was now standing at the center of it all. Nathan handed her the microphone, nodding encouragingly. Emily took a deep breath and faced the crowd. "I never imagined I'd be standing here," she admitted, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "If you had told me a year ago that I'd be leading one of the biggest companies in the city, I would have laughed." A few chuckles came from the audience. "But life is unpredictable," she continued, "and sometimes, we don't see our own worth until someone else does." She turned toward Nathan. "And for that, I will always be grateful." Nathan inclined his head, but the respect in his eyes said everything. Emily looked back at the crowd. "But this isn't just my story. This is for everyone who has ever doubted themselves. For everyone who has ever felt like they weren't enough. You are, and the moment you start believing that, that's when everything changes." A standing ovation. Tears stung at Emily's eyes as she looked out at the people cheering for her. Cheering for the girl who once thought she was invisible. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was unstoppable. As the night wore on, Emily took a step outside onto the terrace, needing a moment to breathe. The city lights sparkled below, a reminder of how far she had come. Nathan found her there, leaning against the railing. "You did good tonight." Emily let out a soft laugh. "I almost passed out." He smirked. "That's how you know it was important." She turned toward him, her expression serious. "Nathan, if there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that we can't always control what happens to us. But we can control how we respond." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's true." Emily exhaled. "I spent so many years thinking I wasn't meant for more. That I didn't belong in places like this. But the truth is, we all belong in the spaces we are willing to fight for." Nathan smiled. "I think that's a lesson worth remembering." Emily looked out at the city. "I just hope people watching this story can see that, too." Emily's journey isn't just a success story. It's a lesson for all of us. She started as someone who didn't believe in herself. She thought she was just a waitress. Just another person trying to get by. But in reality, she was so much more. And so are you. If you've ever doubted yourself, if you've ever thought you weren't good enough, if you've ever let fear hold you back, this story is proof that you can rise. You are not stuck. You are not invisible. Like Emily, you have the power to change your life. So if you believe in rising, if you believe in stepping forward even when you're afraid, leave a comment below. Tell Emily how her story inspired you. Tell the world that you are ready to step into your own power. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel. Because this is just one story. And there are so many more to come. Stories of courage. Stories of overcoming. Stories of people like you, who are ready to rise. So don't just watch, be part of this journey. Like, comment, subscribe. And remember, your story is only just beginning.